All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're tackling a question you specifically wanted us to dig into: the legalities of hitting that record button when you're out and about.
Yeah, it's one of those things that feels like it should be simple, but gets murky fast.
Totally. Especially since, everyone's walking around with a high quality camera in their pocket these days. So before we even get into specifics, what's the overall vibe? Is recording in public generally a go for it or a proceed with caution kind of deal?
Honestly, it's a bit of both, which is probably why you wrote in. There's this constant push and pull between our right to document what's happening and other people's right to privacy. And of course, technology keeps evolving faster than laws can keep up.
Makes sense. So where do we even start untangling this? It feels like a recipe for a legal headache.
Well, like any good deep dive, we got to start with the source material. And in this case, that means the granddaddy of them all, the U.S. Constitution.
Ah, the OG document. Which part are we talking about here? I'm guessing it's not about, like, the right to bear arms.
Definitely not Second Amendment territory. This one falls squarely under the First Amendment.
Mhm.
Specifically, those clauses about freedom of speech and freedom of the press.
Okay, so remind me, what do those actually say? It's been a minute since my high school civics class.
In a nutshell, they basically say that the government can't make any laws to stop you from saying what you think or preventing the press from doing their job.
Right, right. Freedom of the press, freedom of speech, pretty core stuff. But I gotta say, I highly doubt the founding fathers were picturing people casually filming TikToks on their iPhones when they wrote that.
You're telling me. No shade to the Founding Fathers, but they weren't exactly dealing with viral videos and body cams back then. But here's the thing. Courts have consistently interpreted those freedoms to include things like recording as technology has advanced.
So it's not like they conveniently left a little asterisk saying, P.S., this applies to future recording devices too. It's more about how courts have applied those broad principles to new situations.
Bingo. And generally speaking, they've found that the act of recording itself often falls under the protection of the First Amendment.
That makes sense when you think about it. Like, how can you really expose wrongdoing or gather evidence or, heck, even just share your perspective on something if you're not allowed to document it?
Exactly. Imagine a journalist trying to do their job if they couldn't record a protest or a politician's speech.
Or even just thinking about regular folks, like the ability to record interactions with law enforcement that feels huge E for transparency and accountability.
Absolutely. And there's a really important case that solidified this. Glik v. Cunniffe.
Ooh, yeah, I remember reading about this one. It's centered around recording police officers, right?
Right on. Basically, the court ruled that recording police officers while they're on duty in public is 100% protected by the First Amendment. It's about the public's right to see how their government operates, especially when it comes to law enforcement.
So it's not even just about having a record of what was said, it's about the public being able to see what went down, right?
Exactly. And that case set a huge precedent for the power of citizen journalism and how recording plays a key role in holding those in power accountable.
Which makes you wonder, does that ability to record always lead to more accountability? Or are there times when it might actually hinder police work? Something to think about. But okay, so big picture, the Constitution seems pretty clear cut on recording, right?
Well, it lays the groundwork for sure, but as with most things legal, it's rarely that simple.
Uh-oh, I knew there had to be a but coming.
There's always a but. The First Amendment sets a national standard, but things get a bit more complicated when you factor in individual state laws.
Which is where the 14th Amendment comes in, if I remember correctly. Like, states can't just decide to ignore the Bill of Rights, right?
You're on fire today. The 14th Amendment is basically the First Amendment's bodyguard. It makes sure those federal protections like your recording rights apply at the state and local level too. No bypassing the Bill of Rights.
So no matter what state you're in, those basic recording rights we talked about still apply because of the 14th Amendment.
You got it. Beatty, and this is a big but,
Yeah.
states can have their own specific laws about recording, as long as those laws don't clash with those fundamental rights.
Okay, so it's like the Constitution sets the minimum standard, but states can choose to give more rights if they want to.
Exactly. It's all about layers. And since you, our amazing listener, are based in Colorado, that's where we're going to focus next.
Colorado, here we come. So what's the deal with recording laws in the Centennial States? Spill the tea.
Well, Colorado is generally considered a one-party consent state when it comes to recording conversations.
One-party consent. Okay, for those of us who don't speak fluent legalese, break that down. What does that actually mean?
Basically, in most situations, to legally record a conversation in Colorado, At least one person who's part of that conversation needs to consent to being recorded. So if you're chatting on the phone or having a private conversation at, like, a loud restaurant, you're good to hit record as long as you are okay with it.
So it's about making sure at least someone involved is aware it's being recorded. That's interesting.
It is. But, and this is a big but, there's a really important exception to this rule in Colorado, and it's a big one.
Ooh, a plot twist. I do love a good plot twist. Lay it on me. What's the exception?
This exception is all about recording police officers. Colorado law very clearly states that anyone can record any interaction with police officers, consent be damned. No need for permission slips when you're dealing with on-duty officers in public in Colorado. It's all about that transparency.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. It really shows how seriously Colorado takes police accountability.
It does, and it's a great example of how those state laws can sometimes give you even more rights than the baseline from the Constitution, like we were talking about.
So just to be crystal clear, even though Colorado is usually all about that one-party consent thing, when it comes to cops, it's open season. I can hit record no matter what.
That's the gist, yeah.
Yeah.
But, and this is a big but, and you knew it was coming.
Haha, always a but.
Right. There are still some gray areas, even when you're legally allowed to record.
Right, hit me with those nuances. I had a feeling it couldn't be that straightforward.
You're right, it's rarely that simple. The biggie, the phrase you hear all the time in these conversations about recording is reasonable expectation of privacy.
Ah, yes. Reasonable expectation of privacy. It sounds so important, but also kind of vague. What does that even mean in practice?
Totally. It's one of those things that's easier to understand with examples, but
Physically.
it means that just because you're in a public place like a park or a street corner doesn't mean you have free reign to record everything and everyone without any limits.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Give me some real-world examples. I'm all about practicality, so I need those concrete scenarios to really wrap my head around this stuff.
All right, imagine you're in a public park, just filming the scenery, birds, trees, chill stuff, no problem, right? You're in a public space, everything's out in the open, but then you swing that camera over to a couple having a picnic, clearly enjoying some alone time, and you zoom in on their conversation.
Yeah, that feels different. It's still a public park, but they're having a private moment.
Exactly. Even in a public place, there's this understanding that people deserve some level of personal space, some privacy, and that becomes even more important when you're talking about private property.
So, like, my backyard is 100% off limits for recording without my saying go for it.
You got it.
Yeah.
Much higher expectation of privacy on your own turf. But it gets even trickier when you think about places like shopping malls.
Ooh, good point. Malls are open to the public, but they're not quite the same as a park, are they?
Right. They're privately owned, which means they can set their own rules about what's cool and what's not, including recording. You're on their property.
So even though I can walk around, browse, maybe snap a pic of a killer sale, the mall owners get to decide if I film that awesome dance battle happening under the skylight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Always a good idea to check a mall's policies, just in case they have specific rules about recording. Don't want to cause a scene. And speaking of things you don't want to do, there's another group we got to talk about when it comes to recording. Kids.
Oh, yeah, kids. That's a whole other level of sensitivity.
For sure. Recording children, especially without getting permission from their parents, is a huge no-no. Those cute kids say the darndest things videos. Tread carefully, my friend.
Good to know. So, parental consent is key with kids. What about protests or public gatherings? Feel super relevant these days. What's the legal situation there?
Generally speaking, you're usually in the clear to record what's happening at a protest. It's a public event, often focused on, public concerns.
Oh, never.
Oh, I know that, however.
Always a catch, right? Remember our chat about state laws? Well, Colorado's one-party consent rule could trick you up if you're recording audio at a protest.
Why is that?
Well, protests can be loud, kind of chaotic. It'd be almost impossible to get consent from every single person whose voice might end up on your recording.
That's true. So the protest itself might be fair game, but individual conversations happening within the protest, that's where those one-party consent rules could come back to bite you, depending on who's talking and if they know they're being recorded. You got it. Context is everything, right? Even a situation that seems simple can get murky fast.
Speaking of murky, let's say I do hit that record button, everything was totally legal, permissions all lined up. Can I just post that video wherever? Like, Social media, or is that a whole other can of worms?
Oh, that, my friend, is a whole other deep dive.
Okay, so we've gone from the Constitution to Colorado law, and now we're venturing into the wild west of sharing recordings online. I'm already nervous.
Yeah, it's a whole other layer of complexity, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Just because you recorded something legally doesn't mean you're automatically in the clear to share it with the world.
So let's say I've got this perfectly legal recording, permissions, privacy, all that good stuff, checked all the boxes. What could still trip me up when I hit that share button?
One word: copyright. You might own the recording itself, but that doesn't mean you own everything in it.
Copyright, the music industry's favorite word. Give me an example. Make it relatable.
Okay, picture this. You're at a concert, totally hyped, recording your favorite band's set on your phone. You want to share that epic night online. Here's the catch. Those songs, that performance, that's all owned by the artists. Sharing it without their permission, big no-no.
So my amazing air guitar solo in the background is probably fine to share, but the actual music, different story.
Exactly. Your shaky camera work is all yours, but that copyrighted music, whole other ballgame. Always safest to assume you need permission, especially with music or other creative stuff.
Got it. What about situations where copyright isn't really the main issue? Like, say I recorded a disagreement that went down in line at the grocery store. Awkward, a little ridiculous. Kind of fascinating, too. Could I share that?
That's where intent comes into play. Remember, reasonable expectation of privacy. Same idea here. Even if you recorded something 100% legally, if you post it online with the intent to harass, humiliate, or just be mean,
Yeah.
that can put you in hot water legally.
So even if it happened in public and I was allowed to record it, using that recording to be a jerk online is a no-go.
Exactly. Law doesn't look too kindly on folks using recordings to be malicious. You might think it's funny, but the person on the receiving end of that online shaming, not so much. They might even have grounds to sue.
Yikes. Yeah. Cyberbullying is never cool.
Yeah.
So we've covered copyright, intent. What about the social media platforms themselves? They have their own rules on top of all this, don't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Think about those videos that get taken down from TikTok because someone's dancing to a copyrighted song.
Yeah.
Even if you recorded that dance off legally, the second you upload it, you're playing by their rules. Each platform has its own terms of service, community guidelines, and they can be strict.
So even if I jump through all the legal hoops to record something, Instagram, TikTok, whoever, could still take down my video because it goes against their rules.
Bingo. They might have rules about the type of content, how it's presented, whether you got permission from everyone shown. It's a lot.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about knowing the law. It's about knowing the specific rules of each online space, too.
Nailed it. It's a whole other world online with its own laws and customs.
This has been seriously eye-opening. Recording rights feel way more complicated than they seem at first glance.
We only just scratched the surface. And the thing is, this stuff is constantly evolving right alongside technology. New gadgets, new platforms, new ways to share it all brings up new legal questions.
So where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway, the thing you want our listeners to walk away pondering after this deep dive?
I think the big question we're all grappling with is this. Just because recording technology is everywhere now, does that mean we need stricter rules about sharing that content, even if it was obtained legally? It's about balancing individual rights with the very real potential for harm in this online world.
That's a big one. Definitely gives me something to think about next time I'm tempted to document an argument breaking out over the last box of donuts at the bakery.
The struggle is real. But that's what happens when everyone has a front row seat to everything these days.
That's for sure. Well, we'll leave our listeners with that food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the wild world of recording rights.
Anytime. It's always a trip.